Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Thursday, February the 5th, and welcome to our commentary. I've got a post over at the American Thinker today talking about ICE and how I think it's a huge mistake for the Democrats to be demonizing ICE. I mean, you can always say that, look what happened in Minneapolis. We need to be careful, and so on and so on. And that's fair. I mean, you can criticize ICE. That's not beyond the line. But when you start demonizing ICE, and in particular going after the individual agents, I think you're making a huge political mistake because the evidence shows that the American people support the deportation of illegal aliens, especially the criminals. And I think that one of the benefits of having Tom Holman up in Minneapolis is that he's changing the narrative a little bit. And the narrative has to change from ICE is in Minneapolis and the problems they've had, a couple of dead people, unfortunately. The narrative has to change as to why ICE is having problems in Minneapolis, but it doesn't have problems in other places. And of course, the reason is simple. In most cities, whether it's in Texas or they just had a big operation in West Virginia or New Orleans or Memphis or other places, when you get the cooperation of the local authorities, you don't need as many agents from ICE. I mean, the only reason they had so many up there in Minneapolis is because ICE was not only doing its operation, but they needed extra people to protect them from some of the protesters who were not being very nice to ICE. I mean, some of them were using their automobiles and blocking traffic and screaming at them and jumping at them. Obviously, these guys have to be protected. And that's why they had extra forces up there. So, one of the benefits, I think, of having Mr. Holman up there is that I think he can change the narrative so that we're talking about the fact that ICE is not getting cooperation in Minneapolis, but when it gets cooperation, as it does in many other places, the operations are smoother. In other words, it's easier for ICE to concentrate on looking for criminals when they have the cooperation of the local police or the local authorities than when they have to go into neighborhoods and go through people who may live in that neighborhood to look for the person they're looking for. So the Democrats have decided to demonize ICE. They've decided that even in some cases defunding ICE, which is really stupid. I mean, that is really beyond stupid. And I believe they're making a huge mistake because that's not where the country is. And the Democrats, once again, this is one of the big challenges they have. There's an editorial in the Dallas Morning News today talking about this in the context of the race here in Texas between James Tallarico and Jasmine Crockett, where race has been introduced into that race, into that campaign. And as the Dallas Morning News says, identity politics, or these extremes from the left, always kill the Democrats. And you're seeing that with the demonizing of ICE. Where is this demonizing coming from? From the extremes of the Democrat Party. That's where it's at. It's in the extremes. Most Democrats don't support that, of course, but the extremes are the ones who get on television. They're the ones who make the noise. They're the ones who threaten with primaries and so on. And that's why the party often has to say some of the things that, let's say, Senator Schumer has to say criticizing ICE. So I think it's a big mistake for the Democrats to demonize ICE. Huge mistake, and one that they're going to regret. They're going to regret in the campaign because that's not where the public is. The voters are not against ICE. And if we've learned anything from the public is they don't like to see their law enforcement officers demonized either. They want to support law enforcement, whatever it may be, the local police, the military, or ICE in this particular case. So I think the Democrats are making a huge mistake, and the Republicans should call them on it, force them to explain why they want to defund ICE, and force them to take positions on that because those are not winning issues for the Democrats. Well, there's an interesting story that came out today in Real Clear Politics. It comes from a gentleman named Steve Malanga, who writes a great deal about demographics and all of that. And he's talking about the population changes from blue states to red states. It's a very long story. There's a lot of graphs. If you have a chance to check it out, Western Journal, I think, is the source of the story, although you can see it at Real Clear Politics, where they often will feature many of these articles. And it's a fascinating story about what's happening in the country, with more and more people leaving blue states and moving to red states. A lot of different reasons for it: cost of living, taxes, quality of life, just a lot of reasons. And it's happening, though. It's happening, and it's going to have a very significant impact on the upcoming census, because you're going to have almost 10 districts moving, congressional districts, that is, moving from blue states to red states. And of course, what does that mean? The Electoral College changes. All of a sudden, California is not going to have 54 electoral votes. It's only going to have 50. Texas is now going to have 42. And these things, Florida is also adding a few themselves. So when you start looking at the Electoral College, which is how we elect presidents, what you see is that more and more electoral votes are now available for the Republican Party in some of these red states. And even, the old theory was that if the Democrats could hold that blue wall up in the Midwest, that they would win the election. Well, that's not turning out to be that way anymore, because that advantage is being wiped out by all of these districts going to Texas and to Florida and South Carolina and so on. So the Democrats are losing the population battle. More and more people are leaving their states and moving to red states. Are they doing anything about it? Are they seriously talking about any of this? No. I mean, look at California. Is anybody in California having a conversation as to why these people are leaving? I don't hear it. And again, as the article points out, it's not just that people leave. The people who are leaving are often entrepreneurs, taxpayers, small business people, because they're packing up and leaving. So when you lose business, what do you lose? You lose your tax base. And that matters a lot to states, because that's where their taxes come from. So, you would think the Democrats would be talking about this issue, but they're not. And once again, for the same reason they're demonizing ICE, because that party has been kidnapped, if I could put it that way, by the extreme left. And they're the ones telling the Democrats what to say. And they're not telling them to say anything sensible. They're just basically just obsessed with Trump and hating Trump. Well, here in Texas, and I think across the country, we've had some demonstrations against ICE. Now, here in Texas, they've been peaceful, because that's just, I think everybody in Texas knows that if you're not peaceful, you're going to have a problem. But anyway, the concern is that some of these demonstrations are coming from high schools, where all of a sudden a bunch of students from a high school go out in the streets and start protesting ICE. Now, obviously, students have a right to protest. Nobody's denying them that. But the question is, why are they doing this in the middle of the school day? And are the parents even aware that their kids are out protesting? So the Governor Abbott, is investigating what happened in an Austin high school, where some of these kids went out marching. And, I was listening to a couple of parents on the radio, people who call radio shows. And one parent had a very good point. He said, look, I'm concerned about the safety of my son or daughter if they're out there marching, because you never know what agitators could come in to create problems. We've seen some of that in Minneapolis. And another parent said something very interesting. He said, well, these marches are just going to mean that more and more parents are going to be looking at school choice, which is probably true as well. So I think it would be interesting to see what role the school administrators or some of the teachers had in these marches, because I don't believe they should be using kids to march for their political causes. If they want to march on their own time, hey, it's a free country. But you shouldn't be using the kids out there marching on behalf of anything. I don't care what it is. That's not why we send kids to school. We send them there to learn how to read and write and multiply and read and all of that stuff that they're supposed to be doing in high school. So the governor has started this investigation. Let's see what it turns out. Let's see what turns up in the investigation. A couple of things on this day in history. We say happy number 84 to Roger Staubach, the great quarterback of Dallas Cowboys fame. I don't know if he was the greatest. Troy Aikman was very good too, of course. But man, Roger Staubach was exciting, and I remember him all the way. when he was the quarterback for the Cowboys. The famous Hail Mary pass back in that game against Minnesota back in the 70s. Roger just had a flair for the dramatic. That's all I can tell you. So happy number 84 to Roger Staubach. And we remember today one of the great, maybe one of the greatest of all time, and that's Henry Aaron, who was born on this day in 1934. Henry passed away in 2021. It's a shame. He was fairly young when he passed away. And I always loved Henry Aaron. I remember when I was a kid, he was playing for the Braves. And I remember when he set the home run record and all of that, passing Babe Ruth. I was so excited. I was cheering so much for Henry Aaron, just one of my old-time favorites. And unfortunately, passed away a few years ago. I don't know why, but he did. I don't know if he passed away suddenly or what. I'm not sure. But Henry Aaron was quite a presence in Major League Baseball, and it was always great to see him at postseason games or whenever the Braves were playing, and he was there because he was part of the Braves organization, the management, that is. Well, thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.